Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon on our first webinar about the latest support being provided by government. This time, New South Wales government is our focus. A few housekeeping issues, just to remind you all that people who haven't registered can jump onto these webinars. So in terms of, from a confidentiality point of view and privacy point of view, we just remind you to keep your comments and anecdotes fairly information neutral, if you like, so that you're not sharing your confidential information with people who, even your employees potentially. If you have questions, please use the chat function and address the questions to all panelists. Yes, all panelists, that would be good. Now, obviously, in terms of what we're covering today, once again, as per our webinars last year, the information that we have gathered together and tried to interpret is, as it was last year, it's information that the government is generating on the run as the situation evolves. So we are trying to interpret that in the most practical and realistic fashion possible. But there will be certain elements that we're not 100% sure of. And if that's the case, then we'll take those questions on notice and get back to you either later this evening or tomorrow, hopefully, probably with a list of answers of unanswered questions or outstanding queries to all of you. So in that context, I'll hand over to Elissa and Heath to start to answer questions. Please, as I say, use the chat box function to start listing some of your questions. Heath or Elissa, did you want to sort of have a little bit of a
Thank you, David. So just to reiterate what David Conley said, there's a chat function. I encourage everyone to ask a question to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see the question. There's no silly questions. If you're thinking it, then no doubt other people are as well. So we'll try and get through all of the questions that we can this evening. Just as some commentary, which anyone who attended our webinars last year would be aware of, is that the challenge is with any of this is that when you've got a government that's really on the run trying to get and deploy stimulus into the business community, there is quite a bit that goes into putting in place a support and legislative framework around that. What we're seeing very much at the moment is the same as we saw last time, which is we're seeing a government trying to do the best, but when you're trying to deploy a stimulus program, then what's happening is we are getting this stimulus program on the fly via media release without actually getting drafted legislation. So that comes with challenges. What we've seen today is the state government website and services. So Services New South Wales has been down for most of the day because it's been overwhelmed with applications. In terms of what we're also seeing is there's been 3 or 4 contradictory updates that have come through on the state government website. So where we've had one position and then the explanatory memorandum has been changed throughout the day. And we also have some conflict happening between the federal government, Services Australia, and the federal government tax office websites conflicting with the New South Wales website. Now, what that will be relevant for a lot of people is probably not so much, because these contradictions or conflicts is really at the end of this, whereby it's probably an issue for people that are not automatically in the system. So it's quite straightforward really with where we're at now. And I'll use a restaurant or cafe as an example. If you got the $10,000 government payment last time in June last year, then most of the restaurants, cafes, pubs and bars that got that money within about 24 to 48 hours of their application. What has been very clear is that if you were eligible last time for this, you're pretty well by default eligible this time. So what it means is those people in industries that are most likely, most severely affected by this will be in a position that once they've submitted their application or registered their interest, as is provided in the verbiage on the websites, then it's likely that you'll be sort of automatically approved. At least for the first tranche of the $10,000, there will be a requirement to submit additional information to get additional monies. The only other thing I might raise now, just before handing on or over to Elissa, is that we're getting quite a few questions from clients in relation to the Job Saver program, which was the gazetted federal government program, which was likely of sorts an extension of the JobKeeper program. So if I'm a severely or highly impacted business, highly impacted is the terms that are being used in the explanatory memorandum, then it is being indicated that I may be eligible for some federal government assistance. But at the moment, that is yet to be anything more than a media gazette, because we suspect that the federal government is working to see if this is going to hit other states very hard, because it needs to be costed in terms of this, and also who's going to pay for it. Is it the state government, is it the federal government, and how that sort of plugs in. And then I think the only other thing, look, I'll pass on to Elissa now, who can give you some more clarity just around the application of what we are seeing as the explanatory memorandums, not the actual legislation.
So I thought maybe what we could do is just talk through, and I know a lot of people on the call and the video have probably waded through the website in the same, and the New South Wales website in the same way that we have. So you'll probably have equal access to information that we've got. But I guess as a really starting point, as Heath said, if you fall very obviously within the rules, then the claiming is quite easy. So if you operated your business in New South Wales before the 1st of June, if your wages are less than $10 million, if your aggregated turnover is between $75,000 and $50 million, and if you have business costs that you're not claiming under another grant, and if you can show the decline in your turnover, then basically you're eligible to register for this grant. Now, any of the dentists and medical professionals that are on this call would have remembered back last time this grant was in force, was that there was a distinction between what the New South Wales government guessed would be highly impacted people versus what actually were. And so last time around, if you ran a cafe or you had a real estate business, the government automatically said that you were highly impacted. But all of our dental clients, all of our medical clients, they were not in that category. So we needed to prepare letters for all of you to substantiate your income drop. This time around, and when we looked this morning, the government had said that anything really in the medical and allied health sphere, they had recognised there was a significant drop. They've obviously seen that feedback from last time, and so you're automatically included on the list. What we understand this means is that for the first part of the grant, so if you're submitting based on the 2 lower tier drops, so not the 70% drop, but the 50 or 30 drops, that you can actually submit without anything from us. Our understanding, based on what's come out this afternoon, is that if you're submitting under the higher drop, so the 70%, you can claim for the first sort of 10,500 without anything from us, and then we're going to need to provide a letter, a substantiation document that you can submit for the final amount. Heath, that's how you read it, yes?
Yeah, that's absolutely how I do. And I think that what we'll see in this round of stimulus from the state government is that it's important for all of the taxpayers here to understand that the federal government has access via the tax agent and other portals to a whole lot of business information on how you transact, what you file, and just general statistical information that the state government does not have access to. A critical change in this compared to the original COVID support, which came through from administered via the tax office from the federal government, is that the tax office has a lot of information about you. So the ability to determine eligibility with the tax office was extremely sophisticated, on the mark, a very easy and quick turnaround. The state government, what we're going to see is that from a binary point of view, they'll know if you're a restaurant or a cafe. They'll know if you're a dentist that's been shut down. They'll know if you're a pub or a bar. But if I'm a business that wholesales something or supports something, or I'm a recruitment business or something like that, you're not going to be automatically eligible. There's going to be questions asked. And what we saw in the first round, so this same state government $10,000 grant last year, we saw a lot of clients knock back. Anyone that was hospitality, tourism, totally fine, rubber stamp, automatic approved, but they pushed back really hard on a lot of businesses that weren't deemed severely impacted. So I think in terms of what we're going to see on this round is that there's going to be a lot of businesses that are automatically just 100% eligible, and there's going to be a lot of peripheral businesses which are going to be reviewed by a human being, a state government official, that will review what you have submitted. So I think we just need to be careful about what's being put through. And again, we've already got template letters here, which we can provide for our clients, but it is highly likely that the state government is going to ask for additional information about your business, about your address, about the interaction between you and your customers. And that's going to involve, in a simplistic sense, if your bank statement showed deposits 2 years ago of $100,000 and deposits this year of $20,000, I'd have those ready to submit with my New South Wales application. There was another question which I answered in the chat box just about new businesses. They have not given us an exact process on how I deal with new businesses, other than they phrase that I can use an alternate methodology to support the decline in turnover from a new business. All I can do is suggest that that's likely going to be BASs, bank statements, zero data files, things like that.
And just to,
sorry.
I was going to say, just to, I guess, address one of those questions. One of the other changes for this year versus last year's grant is last year you needed to be an employer to be able to qualify for the New South Wales grant. This year you can do so as a sole trader or as a business entity that doesn't employ. So hopefully that answers one of the questions there. The other question, and I guess this is one thing we're really encouraging people, if you're not absolutely desperate to get the money in and there's any questions around your application, you might be worth waiting a couple of days, because at the rate that everything has changed today, there's likely to be more guidance out around what you need to submit. And if you can submit everything all at once, that's probably going to make your claim process quicker if Service New South Wales aren't having to contact you. One thing that we noticed was that the period that they're looking at the drop was from the 26th of June to the 26th of July. Given everything that has happened with construction in the last couple of days, I guess is that they're probably going to have to extend that, because there's going to be a whole pile of businesses that hadn't necessarily been impacted until kind of today or Saturday that will now fall into that list. So that highly impacted list, I'd say, is a few days old, and that's why no one in construction is on that list, but it's likely that that will be updated.
Just to one of Elissa's points too about delaying a couple of days for your registrations, the state government has made it very clear that if you are eligible for federal COVID disaster payments or other payments, you automatically default your eligibility for the state government COVID grant. The federal government is indicating that it's on a week-by-week basis. The state government are just a straight default. So the state government grant is worth a lot more than the federal government payments. So we just need to be very careful about which ones you put in, and it would appear that they're linking individuals and trusts and companies together. So those registrations need to be carefully put. I think to Elissa's other point, there was a question there from Mark about why is construction not on the highly impacted list. I suspect it will be. These things will continue to evolve. Elissa, any comments on how we claim for a sole trader with no employees?
Sure. So if you don't have to have employees, so you can register as a sole trader with no employees. So there's the two different grants. There's the grant, which is basically this up to $15,000 grant that covers your business costs and is designed to have covered your business costs for the last 3 weeks. So that's the grant that the registrations are open for now, the one that the website crashed. And I guess that's really predominantly what we're talking about tonight. You can get that regardless of whether you have employees or not. Then there is the other, which is the job maker one, job saver one that they're talking about, where you can actually get additional funds in relation to that. So the fact that you've got no employees won't stop you putting in this small business grant.
There's another question there about, I think from Wilson, about micro businesses. It has been gazetted again that a micro business, and I'll define a micro business as what the way the state government are looking at it, which would be a business turning over between 30,000 and 75,000 that does not employ people. So what would be captured by a lot of this is a lot of standalone businesses. An example might be a personal trainer or a hairdresser or something like that. Now, in terms of that, on the basis of what has been gazetted, it would appear that a payment, much like JobKeeper, will be available from the state government. It's looked as though that what's been gazetted is this is $1,500 a fortnight or $750 a week. As to the period of which you will be eligible for, should be the same period from when we've had the shutdown, which is the end of June. As to how many weeks it will pay will be yet to be determined how long lockdown lasts for. What I would again counsel would be to register your interest on the state government website as a defined micro business, and wait and see what happens with respect to the state government. The key thing that's enabling the state government, the reason why they're defining one as below 75,000 and one as above 75,000 is it's very easy for them to determine your turnover level, because if you're 75,000 or above, you're registered for GST. The state government gets access to some of that statistical data from the tax office. So that's sort of where those bands sort of derive from.
And I guess to talk to Sean's question that he's put in the chat box, as Heath mentioned earlier, there is conflicting information on the Commonwealth Government site and the New South Wales Government site. So the Commonwealth Government site seems to indicate that you can actually claim the federal payments as long as you don't claim it in the same week or the same period that you're receiving the New South Wales Government payments. The New South Wales website seems to say that if you've applied for the Commonwealth payments, you're actually not eligible at all for the New South Wales ones. Now, the thing about the New South Wales ones is they very much seem to be processed by people. So unlike the JobKeeper ones, which were put through the ATO website and very much automated, these ones seem to have someone in the background looking at it. So whilst there's not a huge amount of information, if you have previously applied for the federal payments, you haven't received them or you have received them and then you're wanting to apply for the New South Wales Government one, you are better turning the federal ones off and actually just putting in the application and putting in as much information as you can, because the New South Wales ones are a much bigger number. And without having any real guidance, you're going to be in a better position to actually apply for the New South Wales ones if you've turned the Commonwealth ones off. Heath, do you agree with that?
Yeah, thoroughly. I would be avoiding any of the federal registrations until the state and federal governments have worked out how this applies. But it's very clear that the state government has said this is a default or a knockout. There's another question there from John about aggregated turnover. An aggregated turnover would be for ordinary accounting purposes and or ASIC purposes. So if my ownership group has revenue of greater than $50 million, then it means I would be excluded. And that would not be aggregated based on state or postcode. It would be aggregated based on the ownership group for federal tax purposes or ASIC purposes. So your turnover is not going to be an aggregated turnover in this postcode. We believe it will be an aggregated turnover nationally. However, we don't have legislation yet.
And Heath, is it correct that it's on an ABN basis? So if you...
No, it'd be a group basis. So if my group's got 10 ABNs in it, it'll be plugging all of the ABNs together after reversing out inter-entity transactions.
Right, okay.
The claim is on a per ABN basis. So
correct,
if you're running
yeah.
three businesses in the one company, you don't get to put three claims in, even if you've got three different sites and they're all doing different things. The claim is one per ABN. You can actually, and those who've been on the website and actually registered already or put their interest in would have noted that you can link multiple businesses to your Service New South Wales account. So our understanding, unlike last time where I don't think you could do that so much, now you can actually, you should be able to claim if you control or own a number of different companies, you should in theory be able to claim under each of those ABNs. However, again, in line with what Heath said, you don't want to be silly with it. It's not worth it. The amount of audit and ATO activity reviewing the last round of grants and the New South Wales government reviewing the last round of grants, just because you can technically doesn't mean you probably should. So if you're looking at it and you've got multiple ABNs, but not all of them really you should be claiming under, we just highly recommend that common sense prevails and you just claim under the businesses that are applicable.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is if people remember the last round of state government support, there was a very tight deadline. So the applications were only open for around about 4 weeks to put the submission through for your state government grant. On this round, it appears that there's going to be a lot more flexibility. It's not going to have the tight or hard close that we saw previously. And so I'm less concerned, much like Elissa, about the urgency of submitting things. I would be inclined, I think, to sit on the sidelines a little bit longer if need be.
Heath, there's a question there from Matt Bourne about the delay in the impact hitting the bottom line.
Sure.
And whether this, whether this is being taken into account.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and Matt, I'll answer this in a sort of a slightly different way. The only thing that they've really come back to us with in terms of explanatory memorandum about a reduction in your business performance or turnover is a turnover test. Turnover would be based on, and again, from a real estate agent, again, it would be based on commissions received from this month compared to the same month in July 2019. And whilst there is whilst you could say, well, this is going to have a really big effect on my business in 12 weeks' time, I suspect in that case, trying to convince on this income earning theory to a junior level clerk at the state government, I suspect that you would fail in that. And if you claimed, I suspect you would lose your audit. I know that that's not ideal. If you wanted to give it another bash, you'd submit a ruling, but it's potentially not worth submitting a ruling for a grant of $10,000 to $15,000.
The registration process is open for the next couple of months. So, and look, there's always a time delay with these things too. So this grant's been out for a couple of weeks now. And in terms of some of the stuff that was, I guess, proposed in those initial stages, you're probably seeing with a different view to how long lockdown was going to last for. So I'd say over the next little while, given the restrictions that they've put in and what they're tightening up, that you'll actually see some changes to this over the next couple of weeks as well, to incorporate probably the time frame and also the number of businesses that will qualify. In terms of the headcount needing to stay the same, there's a fairly broad test in relation to that. But if you're having to stand staff down or reduce their hours, as long as they're still attached, for want of a better word, to the business, so you're still overall employing them, and when business is back, you'll have them back, then that counts from keeping your head count.
Yeah, there's another question there from Melinda about, do we compare it to June 20 or do we compare it to June 19? They've made it fairly clear. The basic comparison on revenue is July this year to July 2 years ago, so to July before COVID, is what they've outlined in the explanatory memorandum. I don't know what effect that will have on certain businesses, but the truth that we've seen across our client base for the last 12 months is that business has broadly been pretty good for a lot of people, and even with a bit of a decline in July, it may not get you low enough. Of course, it certainly would if you were in hospitality and have had to close completely, but they're trying to peg it to a pre-COVID turnover. Now, we believe that there'll be the ability to say, well, look, just compare June to July, or just compare. There's going to be some more flexibility in this, but at the moment, all we can do is say you're comparing June 19 to July 21.
And Heath, have they clarified whether it's cash or accruals in terms of, you know?
It would be, no, but what the federal government did last time, and that doesn't mean that that's what the state government's going to do, but the federal government said it's cash and cash or accrual and accrual. It's not one and then the other.
Yeah, because that might be one for you, Matt, in terms of, Matt Bourne, just in terms of the, your, forecast, what you're going to collect in 12 weeks' time might be different to what you're accruing.
Probably worth factoring into everybody's cash flow too is that, as Heath mentioned, if you're on the highly impacted list, they're trying to get the money out as quickly as possible. If any of your claims are a little bit different or involve someone looking at them or involve a bit of discretion, factor into your cash flow that it's unlikely you'll receive them soon. We still have people who have put in their land tax relief from like 4 or 5 months ago and hadn't been processed. And as all of you who have been on the website today have seen that it's crashed. So there'll be a little bit of a delay unless you fall into that obvious highly impacted category, you should factor into your cash flow that you probably won't be receiving this money for the very short term.
Now, are there any questions with, there was a question from Anna Maria Escobar, I think we missed, so fashion retail to understand lost and decline versus budget or versus last year's sales. Is that a question about whether you can compare it to what you budgeted versus?
Yeah,
what you have
it wouldn't be budgeted, it'd be actual.
Actuals, yes.
Yep.
Yep.
And I think James put in here, it's a 2-week period between the 26th of June and 26th of July. So it's a minimum 2-week period in that month bracket. And as you mentioned, compared to 2019, if your business wasn't around in 2019, then there'll likely be new guidance around what periods you can choose to use as a point of comparison. As long as you're using something that logically makes sense, then I can't see that the New South Wales government are going to have a problem with it. But again, it's going to take a person looking at it and discretion, so it might slow it down a little bit.
Again, I would suspect if you've got to recut every day of every month from one month to the next and look across a lot of it, I suspect as a default, you might not be eligible for this at all. The other component around, there's a couple of questions in relation to headcount. And I think these are very good questions, because if everyone can remember JobKeeper, when it kicked in last year, there was very complicated rules around how long I'd had my staff for. So my staff had to have been employed with me for an extended period of time, 6 months prior to the trigger. A casual staff had to be there for over a year. There was a whole lot of different steps in terms of eligibility for this, in terms of headcount. And the short answer in terms of this would be that headcount per the state government seems to just be headcount. In terms of if JobSaver is going to come on board again, the question will be, will the federal government administer it in the same way that it did previously, or will they try and do it in a different way? All I can say is that from legislative experience with the federal government, they are likely to lean on previous legislation, which means that the quickest way for them to deploy it is with the same rules as last time, right? Because those rules have been refined and drafted and people understand them. But that's pure conjecture on my part. Pure conjecture on my part.
And it seems to be that it's looking at the overall level of wages, much more aligned to a cash flow boost type scenario rather than reimbursing for individual staff. So they're looking at more your overall headcount to make sure that you're keeping your staff broadly at the same level and not letting staff go, rather than in the way that JobKeeper was, that it was very specifically per staff member. There was a question there in relation to if you've bought a business quite recently and you don't have June 2019 numbers, given that for the New South Wales government, they're actually comparing your numbers under your ABN, not the general business that was, you would be better to get data from April, May, June to show that your income in 2 weeks in July is dropped compared to what you were earning earlier, because they're going to want to see it under your ABN rather than the prior business's ABN. Heath, do you agree with that? Yep.
There's a question there from Gary Carson around the service trust of the dental practice.
This was administered poorly by the federal government in terms of the legislative framework last year through COVID. What we saw was basically an undertaking and an understanding from the tax office that they understood that service trusts were linked to practices. What the critical thing, I think, for dentists at that point in time too, was dentists were shut down in April. It was a non-negotiable. So that by virtue of having a service entity that was connected to a dental practice and you were given a stand down order by the Dental Council, I think in terms of that really will covered everyone from a service trust perspective last year. And then if I had a drop in revenue, then understandably I had a drop in service fee potentially as well. If it meant that I had 2 or 3 dentists, for example, operating with one service trust, the question is would each of the dentists be eligible for a business registration, and also the service trust be eligible for a business registration, even if the service trust didn't have a decline in turnover, because the dentists were still paying the fees to the service trust to keep the staff employed, does that mean the service trust will be eligible or not? The short answer on the basis of this would be no, it wouldn't, but the 3 dentists would be. Right? And if the 3 are, is the service trust by association eligible? At this stage, we don't know. There is probably a mechanism within the service trust for the service trust to say, hey, you shut down, we'll pay the bills for a couple of weeks in terms of that. So we'll give you a relaxation on your obligation to pay service fees. But at the moment, the other thing too is there's no obligation for landlords to do so at the moment.
There's a question from Yvonne Monty around having one employee a week. Sorry, one employee. Under minimum per week.
That we'd have to check. There's not a lot of details on that as yet. So I probably will look that up and get back to you on that, Yvonne. But if the 1,500 is the minimum, then that seems more likely they'd give you that, but we would need to check that. And again, there's still fairly scant detail on the business grant that you can currently claim. There's even less on the grants that are coming up. So we'll have a look and see what's been released in relation to that and get back to you. But otherwise, I'd say work on the $1,500, but we're not sure.
Okay, and the question from James there on accrual, writing off of doubtful debts. Yeah, I guess you don't want to account for any income you're definitely not going to get, that's for sure.
Whether writing things off would actually count as a reduction of turnover, I think what they're more interested in is your pure turnover. So if you look like you were dumping a whole lot of sales to make it look like you came under the limit, be really careful. One thing is if you're having the New South Wales government or the tax office or anyone reviewing anything at any point, the simpler that your accounts are and the simpler that your affairs are, the better. So I wouldn't go and do that just to qualify or to make it more obvious. But as David said, you definitely don't want to be invoicing something if you're on accruals that you don't think you're going to receive.
Yeah, I think one of the other things too is that if we put a bit of commercial context over what the state government's offering, if you are a business that employs 50 people and you're looking at some form of government grant of $10,000 to $15,000 for 3 weeks, and we don't know what the federal government might do, and by putting all of these applications through, I've got to do a lot of work with paperwork and also increase my audit risk with the state government. I think you need to practically ask, is it sensible to even claim? Also, because because these claims are being run through Services New South Wales and the state government, they're not being administered under our tax agent program. You have less protection if that's the case. However, a $15,000 grant for a cafe that employs 2 people is a really big deal, right? And those cafes and restaurants are likely to just get default eligibility there, but they're going to get the money straight away. But I would be careful about trying to twist and wriggle around too much to be eligible for this, because if you have the wrong industry code, your chance of audit increases exponentially. And again, we're not sure what the federal government's going to want to do, but in terms of this, there is the ability to partially stand down staff again if you are shut. That enables your staff to go and register for the COVID disaster payment or other support via Centrelink. Now, if you have non-related staff, so staff that are not your spouse, your children, your lineal descendants, you're part of your family, so you've got arm's length staff that you partially stand down, and those staff will also be eligible for COVID disaster payments. So if your business is struggling making those payments, then there is a way that you can partially stand them down. By virtue of that stand down letter, they would then append that to their application for a COVID disaster payment in their own names.
It's probably worth mentioning too that you are limited in when you receive this money from the New South Wales government, you are limited in what you're allowed to spend it on. So especially if you're a sole trader, you can't just take the money out and spend it on whatever you want. So it's not like JobKeeper payments last year where you got it as a business participant and the tax office didn't really care what you used it for. This particular money you need to use in your business and to pay for business related expenses. So things like utilities and rent, things like marketing and communication, the cost and covering the cost of any, if you've got perishable goods that you've lost, that sort of thing. So I guess just be careful as well in terms of once you receive the payment, make sure that you track what you use it for, and that you don't just basically take it straight out of the account and put it into your personal account.
Any other questions, anybody? Just so everyone knows, we have another webinar tomorrow at 11, by which time we might know a little bit more. And obviously, if the guidance coming through does change things, we over the next few days and weeks, we would of course schedule other webinars to follow up. Scott Hogan Smith here has a question.
I think it's a statement.
Statement. Yeah. That crazy. Whose client is he?
So exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Scott makes the point, for those who can't see it, it would be much easier if the tax office were administering these schemes and sent the state government bills for their share. But it doesn't look like the federal government wants them to take the lead in this, given it's a state-based issue. And Palaszczuk wouldn't pay the bill. You know that.
That's true. Well, she's too busy in Tokyo.
She's too busy in Tokyo, exactly. Yeah. But no, Scott's right. The tax office would be much better to administer this than the state government. The tax office and the federal government websites wouldn't have crashed today. The Services New South Wales is designed to people to check the points that they've used up on their license. Like, it's not designed for this. This is yeah, above and beyond. So look, I think that's probably, Elissa, that's about all of the key things to run through. We will continue to update our client base when there is meaningful change. We jumped onto it today because obviously the state government have released all of their explanatory information combined with updated the websites to allow registration. So this was sort of a very topical. There'll be another one of these tomorrow. Again, lots of questions that we just don't have the answer for at the moment, but this will continue to evolve as COVID evolves. I've got another question from Jessica. COVID disaster. Jessica, our understanding is that if there's going to be a kick-in by the federal, so firstly, the kick-in by the federal government might not be to you as a business owner. It might just be a payment to the state government. That's the first thing we need to be aware of, because this has been gazetted but not finalised. If there's going to be additional payments in relation to JobSaver or keeping staff in employment going forward, that may be a joint payment from the state and the federal government, but at the moment we don't know. And I think practically what happens in the other states will determine this, because you can't just give a blank check to all of the states across the board, because if there's other states that are not in lockdown, then there's a question of, is it equitable that they should get the payment? But I won't get involved in the political discussions other than to say, I'm glad I don't have to make these decisions. All right, well, I think that's about it. Thank you, everyone. Yep. There'll be a recording of this, I believe, updated on our website. And if anyone has any other direct questions, please just reach out to the team that looks after you here at ECOVIS. And if there's any other questions, look, please just jump on our Zoom tomorrow.
And thanks for bearing with us as everything changes. And like Heath said, we'll keep you in the loop as much as we can.
Yep. All right, take care, everyone. Thanks for
joining us.
Yep.
Bye.